Now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Peyton Marshall. Peyton served in a number of product management, sales, C-suite roles in the financial services, biopharmaceuticals, healthcare IT, B2B sales, and marketing software spaces. As CEO of LeveragePoint, he has worked with a number of world-class companies to address their product management, marketing, and sales challenges. So with that, Peyton, welcome.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks everyone for joining. It's been an extraordinary 4 months, and between evolving disease, a yo-yo economy, changing attitudes, it's been interesting as we've all tried to adjust. There's been a lot of great content out there, and one of my favorites is the Next Normal series that McKinsey's been putting out, where the high spot for me was the dual interview of General Jim Mattis and Kevin Snyder, the global managing partner of McKinsey. And I really like this quote because Mr. Snyder just boils it down to the importance in a time like this of focus. Keep everyone healthy. Be there for your customers. It's really pretty simple, and it's helpful to be that simple at times like these. Nick Mehta, the CEO of Gainsight, I think anticipated a lot of the issues in March in a very good blog where he highlighted the reasons customer success is important in the downturn. New sales will decline. Guess what? They have. New accounts are tough these days. Your existing customers need your help. They do. Your existing customers notice who will be there for them. They will scrutinize outcomes and experience, partly because they'll be looking to consolidate spend. And so as we turn our focus in the midst of COVID and post-COVID to our existing customers, it's very important to think this through. I got a webinar invitation yesterday to a webinar entitled Retention is the New Growth. So today's webinar is about customer success and delivered value, where what we're going to try to highlight is how customer conversations can help keep and grow accounts. The whole term customer success has become a well-defined term, at least in software. The basic notion here is that as software companies work with their customers, they really should have professionals who are focused first and foremost on the success of their customers and actually using their software. So when you ask what customer success is, you get a list of answers that may include a number of activities like programs, services, training. It may include some data analytics, looking at NPS or health scores. It usually includes some kind of cycle of review and conversation, like quarterly business reviews. But if you want to drill down into what's important, it's pretty clear. The Customer Success Association themselves define customer success as increasing sustainable proven value for customers. Lincoln Murphy, the author of The Definitive Guide to Customer Success, points out that churn is just a symptom of an underlying disease. That disease is customers aren't achieving their desired outcome. And Jerry Murray, in a great IDC white paper recently, highlighted the relationship between value models and the success of customers, saying value models really should be the basis for assessing that relationship and its success. So if you look at customer success practiced right, it's really about business outcomes and customer value. So in the customer success world, how is it measured? And you'll find that predictive customer success management talks about health scores as a good data-driven approach. Well, it's interesting when you think about a good value proposition, because a value proposition directly measures customer outcomes. it really gets at a question that a customer will answer, whether you're with them live or on a screen. How much specific value have you delivered to us? So we look at customer value as the central customer metric. Not that health scores aren't important, but that customer value can help realign health scores to include the metrics that are important. And that makes the outcomes measured by health scores relevant. Now, we've been talking in software as a service language, but customer success as a philosophy or as an approach goes far beyond SaaS. And even if you don't use that term in your business, you'll recognize that your existing account managers face some of the same challenges. So we look at this general challenge of existing account management and how do you talk about what you're actually delivering to them as an outcome, as one that spans the high-tech world, gets into manufacturing. We have a specialty chemicals example we'll include. We'll look at healthcare today. And as you think about existing account relationships, value propositions can support those relationships in a number of ways. They can help establish a role as a trusted advisor by understanding the customer's business. They can help agree objectives and metrics, help in prioritizing. Value is a way to measure outcomes, and having measured outcomes help prioritize in what do you do next to course correct. Value is a way to retain customers. Value is a way to upsell and expand because it's about an agreed business case. And then value is a language that's spoken in the C-suite. So as a way to elevate conversations at your customers, being able to speak the value you deliver is a way to get the right meeting to move a customer towards either a retention decision or an expansion decision. Finally, value is a way to partner. And increasingly, the use of value sharing contracts, outcomes-based pricing, is a way that the best B2B companies are beginning to consider how they manage their customer relationships. Now, new account selling and existing account management do have things in common. And in B2B, they both face multiple stakeholders. And in B2B, new account sales and existing account management also both benefit from customer value conversations. But there are important differences. And as I think about those differences, they vary from, with new accounts, it's a high cost, high time to revenue kind of activity. New account sales is trying to overcome a status quo bias. So new account sales may have more disruptive messages like, why change? Why change now? Why us? And as you then think about existing accounts, there may be differences. Okay, existing accounts, you already have them. They may be lower cost and faster time to increased revenue. But you're doing something different. Now that this is an account, you're looking to defend the status quo. And the real art as you defend the status quo is nudging that customer toward evolving. So the messages are different. Why stay? Why pay more? Why evolve? If you haven't read it, there's a great book, The Expansion Sale, put out by the team at Corporate Visions. And they have a very disciplined and research-based approach to some of the key messages in working with existing accounts. One key one is why stay, where you want to reinforce the status quo bias, where tracking through a set of messages, a kind of disciplined process to document results, review decisions, talk about risk of change, highlight the cost of change, look at your own advances, that can drive a good conversation. Similarly, when it comes to why pay more, they go through a similar sequence as they think about how to get to what what you've done for your customer before you get to a potential price increase and even a set of tactics to anchor that price increase as you begin to offer discounts relative to that high anchor point. They've got a good set of messages on why evolve, and this may be the trickiest one of all, where again, talking about results you've delivered is important, but then beginning to consider what the evolving pressures are, what the hard truths might be, what the risk to the customer might be of no change. And that's an interesting balance as you've, started from a base of the status quo. As you then make that transition to what's your upside opportunity. So we're going to be considering some of this message flow as we go today, and won't be able to do a detailed tracking of it relative to some of the corporate visions work. But I really think that this is a good reference point as you begin to think about what your value messages are to existing customers. Now, with existing customers, there's a cycle. So if the aim is to make customer value at the center of your conversations, and that's a good central objective, you need to think of it in timing terms as you work through a year. Where at the beginning of a year, as you're trying to move things forward with your customer in how they use your product and how they implement your product, you're really looking to motivate them. You're looking for customers to take ownership as a customer success professional or as an account manager. Before then, you're really getting to objectives. What are your targets for the year? How do we move from concept into execution mode? Because through the course of the year and the cycle, a good set of relationship management will be revisiting. You'll be monitoring how things are going. And a way to do that is relative to the value you're aiming to create for them, so that you can revise, make changes, so that at year end, the assessment's a good one. And the customer is ready to evolve, ready to move to the next year, potentially at a higher level or at least at a committed level. So we think of this through the sales cycle as value conversations support a trusted advisory relationship through the customer's experience. So today we're going to try and illustrate this. And rather than a lot of theory, we're going to take some illustrative case studies to try and show how value can influence and alter the way customer success conversations are held and proceed. And we'll do that with 4 examples. The first one will be a software company where we're looking at a software implementation. And in that one, it's going to be the start. The implementation itself will be the start of a value dialogue. And as we get through the cycle, we'll look at questions of why stay, why pay more. We'll then take a little less time on LeveragePoint as a similar situation, but where this time the customer starts having bought the software on a value proposition. And we'll look at how that value proposition then informs the implementation and gets us through the course of the cycle to the next year. We'll then go to healthcare, where in this case, we'll look at a C-suite presentation where a company with a post-surgical remote patient monitoring solution will be looking to influence executives to basically to influence their hospitals within a network to buy more of their product, to buy more of their solution. And we'll look at using a value proposition for those purposes. And the final one will be a chemicals example, where it's an interesting circumstance to think about value-based contracting. And so we thought we'd take an example here to look at that as a foundation for aligning the seller and the buyer, because when it's a value-based contract, both parties have skin in the game. So with that, I'm going to turn to the first case study, which is Service.com, which is a solution that sells cloud software to IT services companies. Their customers use the software to manage their technicians, to serve customers, to administer their business. And the starting point in this case study is Service.com has just sold a new account where their sales team is handing off to the customer success team. It's a new customer. They have a 3-year contract. Retention may be less important here, but we're going to look at that customer stream view. And at our all hands org meeting, we're really going to introduce the notion of customer value in how we think about the implementation. And in doing this, we'll work our way through a cycle for Service.com, where in our initial meeting, they'll both be trying to motivate, and then they'll try and make this transition towards execution, where they're really looking to set targets. And those targets will then be the basis of monitoring through their QBRs, through their implementation process. As they then move towards their cycle at year end, where they're looking to review the success of the program in a sort of year-end review, and they may be looking to make a modest change in the program itself. So we'll look at a situation where they're really looking at that point to get the customer to pay more. So with that, I'm actually going to go to the value proposition, and I'm hoping you're seeing that now. So here we are in an implementation for value, and it's the initial presentation for StreamView, the customer we talked about. And as our customer success team comes in, they want to review. They're getting a handoff from the Salesforce and want to review the fundamentals of what the software platform does before they begin to set objectives for the meeting. Okay. And clearly implementing a new platform that's being used across functions, it's important to reduce tool confusion, to increase efficiency, to improve service. And as they then begin to get into it, they begin to customize their thought process for StreamView. So we hope they've done their homework in advance, where they've understood the magnitude of the StreamView business, where StreamView is a $20 million revenue business. And we hope they've understood the scope of the operations, where maybe they have 85 engineers. And potentially, as they think about it, StreamView might service 11,000 pieces of equipment. So in thinking in a broad framework, they're beginning to think specifically, and they're beginning to talk to StreamView about StreamView's business. What's going on there? Because when it comes to implementation, it's then important to think about prioritization and timing. Now, Service.com does a lot of stuff. It's an operating platform. And it improves technician productivity, device management, project tracking. It helps get rid of legacy systems. But then it has effects on other parts of the business, like billing efficiency, sales productivity. So it's important as you begin to have the conversation is to say what's important. So maybe the HR team is already on another platform, and that's really not a priority for StreamView. And we've already set this one up so that maybe getting into the productivity of sales team is something we want to do later. Maybe we want to delay the billing efficiency work as well. So thinking about this project and thinking about what matters, we're beginning to customize to the important stuff. We're beginning to adapt the way we think about what it is we're trying to do. And you'll notice there's already a value message here. The value message is sitting in the lower right. It's giving us a sense of what the payback is, what the ROI is. Maybe you want to highlight it or not. But what we're trying to do as we do the implementation is think about value. And then what becomes important is to understand the sources of value. And now, as you look at this, you realize the bulk of the value is really coming from technician productivity and device management. And it's great to have these other sources of value. They're adding to the net benefit. But our aim is going to be to implement this so that we can measure what we're doing for them. And we can measure it through time. So here's a graph where what you're seeing is, yes, there is an upfront investment. And as we're moving through time, there are benefits and there are costs, and there's a net. But we're seeing the cumulative value as we go, and we're seeing that over the 3-year contract horizon. And that becomes a vision that we look to motivate. We're looking to generate $5.7 million in net value for them. Now, of course, there's some next steps. And whenever you're doing an implementation, you may want to think about, okay, so who's accountable for the program? And we might want to go back and refine our target metrics. So let's follow up on that. And as we begin to think this through, what we now have is a good value proposition where we've customized what we're doing to this specific customer. Because the next thing we want to do is define those targets a little better. And to do that, what I think we'll do is go back and let's consider now, with this same underlying content, where did the value really come from? We saw that before. We saw that the sources of value are primarily in these two areas. So it's really natural to concentrate our targets there. So as we look at technician productivity, what does that come from? Well, it comes from some operating assumptions about how many tickets per week per engineer. And it comes from assumptions about, what percent of those tickets are we going to solve with better automation? And so maybe I want to modify and customize that. And having sort of thought about that value and having maybe modified for what's a reasonable target, we now see a targeted quarterly rate of something that's measurable. We can actually measure, and we measure it in our software, how many tickets are being generated each quarter. And the same idea goes with device management. So that having thought about what's realistic, having maybe managed expectations, having talked deliberately about expectations relative to how sales might have sold this, we're focusing on value, but we're evolving this toward an agreed set of objectives and an agreed set of accountabilities. So that having done that, we're seeing how we've modified this value proposition. And we've seen how we've modified our approach as we go then to a next stage. And I think potentially it's reasonable to think of the next stage as what's our progress now as we move into quarterly business reviews. What's our progress in terms of these sources of value? Because having started off with targeted data, now we're at the point where we're getting reality. So I want to begin to think about what's actually happening in terms of those two objectives, productivity outcomes and device management outcomes. And here was my targeted, my ticket rate per quarter that I was targeting. So when we get together with them, we're going to look for what their actual rate was. And as a software vendor, I can probably find out something from the software itself. So maybe they realized 63,000 tickets. And now we're going to make this transition from looking at targeted to actual. And we're modifying that value proposition. We're changing it, but it's based on the reality of what really happened. So again, we set an hours-based target on this side. And so now maybe we've got an actual target and we have an actual number for hours. And maybe that actual number came out at more like 3,000 hours than 2,750. Because again, the software itself is measuring the hours that engineers are actually spending on accounts. It's part of the way that the actual service process is being recorded in the software. So that having done this, we now have a modified view of the timing. And our QBR says, okay, we've moved this along so that then when we get to what are we doing next year, we again are starting with those sort of general ideas, but now we have a different agenda. We're reviewing our outcomes. We're looking at the implementation. And then we're thinking about what's actually gone on with our platform. So here's what we set out to do. And here's our revised value based on actual outcomes. And as we think about what's happened in the last year, we've done a lot to improve the software for you. So we'd like you to consider a year two, and we're going to take a perspective that's a forward-looking basis, but we'd like you to consider we have a special program of services that we think will enhance your results, and it's been proven to do that for other customers. And one way to pay for that program or to help pay for it is to consider a contract extension. So maybe we want to think about that. And having thought about those things, then we're still in a value mode. We can take the way we've thought about value and look at the benefit of the new program, which has an annual cost of $32,000, right? And we can look at the cost of the professional services and look at the annual costs overall, but then also compare it to the annual benefits. And so we have this ability to think about it. If they're a little shy about contract extension, well, that's going to raise your cost a little bit. And of course, your year 4 benefits probably go away, but it's still a net positive. So there's a tool to help them think through a decision that's already based on an agreed framework for understanding value and to see the timing going forward. So as I think about this, I can look at the program going forward with the contract extension or without it. And I can even take the perspective year 2 forward, or I can go back and say, look at what we've done for you in the course of the relationship. So just an example then, as you think about how you can work with a customer through the course of a cycle. So I'll take a next example, which is, my next example is LeveragePoint, where LeveragePoint, as I think most people know, is a platform for customer value. We have customers who use us not on the sales side, but for decision making. We have customers who use us for better sales results. And as we look at this, we're going to take a specific case. So the LeveragePoint sales team is making a handoff to the customer success team for a new scientific equipment customer by the name of LabMax. And this is a 1-year subscription. It's focused on value selling. And what we're really out to do as an implementation is to define what it is we're going to do going forward with this one group that the sales team is sold to, which is the services division. Now, as the sales team sold this, they did it based on a value sale. And I know we've talked about that in other webinars in terms of a process, but that's a process too. But now when we get to the customer success cycle, we're starting with a value proposition that then helps us at the implementation phase, helps us at the quarterly business review phase, and then helps us at a time where we might be making a proposal both to renew and potentially to expand to another business. So with that in mind, let's look at that value proposition. And as I say, this has already been sold on value. So we're starting with the value proposition we've inherited from sales. And that value proposition is about how do you improve sales performance, particularly by working with the middle of the bell-shaped curve on the sales side. where as you think this through, you've got a number of impacts here. And what we've really done already is there's already a bit of a plan that as we go to implement for LabMax, we're looking for a first-year deployment in their services business. And we have some details that the sales team has handed off to us. 120 salespeople, $75,000 per deal, 18 closes per year. That's their average, and that's the sort of pot of revenue that we're looking to improve. And so the sources and the way the sales team gave us this is they talked through the value drivers with the team. And those value drivers in this case are really about how many opportunities does the sales team get. And they've actually agreed on a target increase there of 8% based on some other customer experience. They've agreed on, that it's reasonable to expect a 10% increase in deal size. But again, we may want to modify that in the course of setting expectations. They've agreed on a win rate. They've agreed on a sales cycle. And so the whole value velocity story we've already inherited that. And that inheritance suggests that the impact, if well implemented or completely implemented, is a 33% increase in sales. So we're starting off with that. But the important thing is that's going to be a staged implementation. And fortunately, the sales team has not said we're going to get to 100% year one. Again, we might want to think about a more gradual year one, where maybe we're only getting 7% or 15% year one. But the expectations in the handoff have been set and are evolving as we go, so that then the implementation itself can focus on what's important, which is adoption. And in thinking about adoption, there are some fundamentals. There's a roadmap. And the roadmap includes coming up with good value propositions. It includes making sure sales leadership is on board with that a mobilizer is appointed, and that there's real and genuine use on a systematic basis. So the formula for implementation then takes over from the sale, and it even becomes a basis for review. So here's a success map through the course of the year, where potentially we're thinking about, so what's the quality of the value proposition? They had a pre-existing spreadsheet. We need to get to a value proposition, and it may even be evolving. So, testing is the next stage. We've identified a sales leader, but we need to have that value proposition in front of her when it's ready. We have a potential mobilizer who's going to drive this process among salespeople. And we've identified that person, but we really want to make sure that the VP of sales, is on board with that. And as we think about this process, as we engage with opportunities, as we've tracked the status, as we even consider how do we publicize internally so we gain momentum here? Is there a video in place? Do we have a success going on? Do we have a success webinar ready to go? We have the ability to review all this and even review this in status report form. So here's how opportunities have been addressed. Here's how we tried to set targets. What have we learned from those? How are we tracking? How are we tracking what's gone on with these opportunities? And so as we work through implementation and review, we've got a good disciplined way as we're moving through to think about next year. So how do we think about next year? Well, we transition. So from implementation to renewal, we go back, We go, this is what we were setting out to do, the services group. Here's how we were thinking about the potential of that. Here was our adoption plan, and okay, maybe we overachieved, maybe we underachieved, but let's kind of look at how we think about that value. Here's even here are some of the things we were doing. Here's the status most recently as we thought about it. So as we think about the year in review, we've deployed the value proposition. We've proven out the value. And now as you think about your business, LabMax, what's your positioning? What are you hearing from the competition? And what are you hearing from the competition, not in services where we started, but in equipment? So are your teams shaping the RFPs that you get? So the potential expansion discussion then becomes let's think about this for the equipment business. And as we do that, we want to understand what that sales force looks like. So again, we're going to modify this so that that's a 150-person sales force. They're doing larger deals, but fewer closes per year. And we have a potential pot of revenue with that group to think about as we then turn to a potential year 2 plan, where here we're looking to expand. With the expansion, we'll be at 365 total users. We've got an incremental cost before we think about the impact just for this addition. So having thought about it, we've made the transition from value delivered to thinking about the opportunity by way of helping them think about what some of their risks are by not acting. And so as we move to the new adoption plan, we have a combined plan that includes the original business, but also includes the new business. So that's the second one. Let's look at the medical space. And we're going to look at a healthcare company that has monitoring technology and on-call services for patients following surgery. And the team has a meeting with the CFO of a medical network. And this is their first shot at the CFO of the network. So they want to have a good C-suite kind of conversation. Now, in their initial implementation, they've been targeting the high-risk patients. So what they need is a good way to talk about what it is they've been delivering and talk about the actual program itself. And so they're going to discuss it in terms of value. So let's look at this case study. And to do that, slightly different look, a full screen kind of look, where we're getting into their value proposition. Telesphorus is a company that delivers connectivity, remote monitoring for world-class post-surgical care at home. And in doing that, they're introducing it to the CFO. They might have a video to help. They might have a number of things. But they're really introducing what it is that remote monitoring does with their services, with their people, because they want to talk about the value and the value of high-quality remote care. Because having state-of-the-art monitoring that's delivered to patients after they've checked out of the hospital reduces readmissions, is more time efficient for doctors and nurses on hospital staff, and results in earlier discharges. And they've got the data to back that up. So as they get into the conversation, they want to show that they understand this customer. So this network consists of 4 hospitals who at this point are doing 64,000 procedures a year. And in understanding what we've done so far, we've really been focused on the tier 1 patients, both inpatient and outpatient, where different hospitals within the network have deployed this at different rates. So Shore Heights Central at 70%, while it's been pretty slow at Shore Heights South at only 5% of the targeted patients. And in having this review, then they translate this to, okay, here's the value we've delivered, 2.9 million a year versus not doing this at all. And if you want to know where it comes from reduced readmissions with these assumptions. And it comes from reduced remote care calling time, where you've taken nurses and doctors out of the front line for remote care. They're still there, but now the Telesphorus professionals are the first line of call. You've improved discharge and reducing length of stay, say 1 in 5 patients, 0.2, is worth a lot per year. And with all this as background, you're really saying, hey, here's what we've done for you. Now let's think about next year and what we can do better. And next year, we're really sort of changing how we think about this. So let's look at what we might plan to do versus the old world. And let's talk about expanding the patients, not just having tier 1 patients, but having tier 2 patients. And we've got some programs that we really suggest with your help that we deploy to increase the uptake. Now, this is a 2-year contract. It's always natural in these kind of conversations to say, you're paying $80 a patient right now. Maybe by making the transition to a 4-year contract, you can reduce some costs. We've already proven out the results. Now let's really drive the program. And in driving the program, now we're looking at making a transition from 9,400 patients to potentially 38,000 patients with this new improved program. What does that mean? Value across the network and value by individual hospital. So think about this review as getting to that and then understanding the global picture. So again, a C-suite review, it changes the tenor of the conversation. And so finally, let's look at one more example, which is Dean Chemicals. New solution where they have a new boiler automation system that provides better control of chemistry. And they're in discussions with Adherence Tire, a major tire manufacturer. So Dean presents the value and Adherence asks for guarantees. Happens a lot with big important customers. And as we look at that, then let's go to Dean. And as we think about the Dean solution, we've got an innovative technology. It's both technology and it's patented chemicals, where the economic effect for a manufacturer on their boiler system includes energy savings, water savings, labor, reducing the risk of replacing parts and having failures, and longer equipment life. Now, always you want to modify this for the customer. So maybe Adherence has higher steam production per hour in their boiler system. They may have different parameters, but these are the all-important operating parameters as they go. We've got a highlight of the actual values of each of those value drivers. And we can get into the details of each one. The energy savings expected, the water savings expected. So we have a classic value story, as I think you've seen from LeveragePoint before, as we go into the reason to buy. And in this case, the purchase actually involves an upfront investment of a certain amount, so $115,000 or annualized $16,000, and some chemicals, where we're really looking to charge a premium to the current chemicals, the scale inhibitors that Adherence Tire buys today. So the value proposition we're proposing looks like this. Here's the amortized cost of the equipment. Here's the extra cost of the chemicals. But then here are the positive value drivers. So prove it. Put your money where your mouth is. Partnering in value-based contracting is a long-standing practice that's fast becoming a trend. We've been doing it in biotech for 20 years. It's been done in manufacturing. You may have heard the SKF and some other stories where there's value-based contracting, but increasingly in chemicals and services, it's important. Gartner suggests that 60% of asset managers will offer outcome-based contracts in just a couple years. So when do these value-sharing contracts make sense? Well, when the purchase decision is important for buyer and seller, when it's differentiated, when post-sale outcomes are uncertain, when there's performance on both sides. Again, customer success is about teams performing, and maybe when the buyer has market power. So there's a lot to think about in an outcomes-based contract. It's about measurement. What can we measure? It's about how do we share risk and reward? It's about incentives. If we take all the downside, guess what? Our customer may not be incented to perform well. And it's about what risks should be shared and which ones shouldn't. So in this example, we have an actual value proposition that's now ready to think about what is my value sharing? And in thinking about that value sharing, what we're really about to do is starting with my net value. Now I can think about an outcomes-based contract. And as I do my value sharing, let's look at that contract. There may be a number of those value drivers that the customer would like us to guarantee them on, but some of them are harder costs and easier to measure than others. And in particular, there's energy cost and there's water costs. Those are measurable. They're on meters. And everyone can measure and monitor how much of our chemicals they used. So let's think about a contract where only those are shared and where we're only going to share some of the risk. So we're going to share the performance risk, but as a chemical company, we're not necessarily prepared to take risk on the cost of water or the price of natural gas. And let's share it. Let's make it 50-50. So here we've got that kind of approach. So with this sort of basis, what we might want to do is modify some of the targets for the actual sharing. So maybe we're looking at a 2.1% in energy savings, certain amount of chemical use. But as we move through, now we've got some kind of outcome participation, so that then at the end, when I actually get to my outcomes next year, I can actually look at those outcomes and I can go in and change them. So my actual operations didn't run for the expected period. They only ran for 6,700 hours during the year. And having made that change, perhaps my natural gas usage exceeded my targets. So I've got one, and that was part of the participation. So having thought about all that, we actually see what was our original target. How did we do our calculations of that target adjusted for the contract? And what were the actual outcomes? So that we can see what our net realized value was based not on targeted, but based rather on the actual outcomes. So with all this, what you really have is a new basis to think about think about your customer, to get into a set of conversations that support better account relationships. Because what value does is it helps you clarify goals. It helps you manage expectations, and I hope we've shown that. It can help you with segments. It can help support decisions, and we saw a few examples there. And it can promote collaboration and partnership. So when you think about customer success, think customer value. Think existing account revenue growth. As Paolo D'Angeli, who's a Borealis LeveragePoint customer, puts it, value in the spring, price in the fall. Nick?
Thank you, Peyton, for sharing your insights. We've had a few questions come in during the webinar, and there's still plenty of time to enter your question into the panel on your screen. While you're entering, just a quick reminder to please complete the 10-second survey while exiting today's webinar. You'll be entered into a raffle for a copy of Dollarizing Differentiation Value. Now, while you fill out your questions, just a quick word about LeveragePoint. Here at LeveragePoint, we're the leading enterprise value management and value selling cloud solution. With our SaaS platform, as you saw, we help our customers convey the quantified value of their offerings through interactive digital value propositions. And by aligning entire commercial teams from pricing and product to marketing and sales all around value, LeveragePoint helps B2B companies increase win rates, achieve higher prices, and shorten sales cycles. And if you found any of that interesting, let us know in the post-webinar survey, and we can schedule a custom demo for you and your team. So let's kick off the Q&A. The common one is, yes, this webinar is going to be recorded. We'll be sending out the slides within the next couple business days. The first one I see is, how does value-based customer success get started?
Good question. So sometimes it starts without a push. There's the fire drill approach. And sometimes that's very organic, where a customer success team suddenly has a customer at risk and they scurry around to come up with understanding their delivered value. Or the other way it starts organically is large account managers, where they realize for multi-million-dollar contracts, when they have contract reviews, they better be able at a C-suite level to be able to talk value. So the great thing about that is it can start organically, or it can start because you have a value selling resource who already is doing good value propositions for new accounts, but then is called to the rescue when it comes to existing accounts. So think about all of those as elements that can start from the ground up. And what then becomes important is that there become success stories, that those success stories then lead to hard data, and that data supports sustainability. Perfect.
This is an interesting one. How do you make sure your new business teams are aligned with and then the ones accountable for revenues, how do you make sure they're aligned with your success, service, or support teams, or whatever the organization refers to it as?
So I think the customer success world in software is certainly talking about this all the time, in the same way marketing and sales are talking about alignment for new accounts. And it's clearly important. Alignment is really about some of the fundamental objectives that customer success has, and it's really a broader problem, is setting expectations, monitoring those expectations, making sure the expectations are realistic, and then having a good way to measure and talk about value at the end. So value and value propositions used by customer success actually become a solution to the alignment problem, because they become a single yardstick way to get to what the outcomes actually are and what they mean, that both people responsible for revenue and people responsible for success can collaborate on.
Great. I think we have time for one more, and I'll go to this one. Any hints on how to make the process that we just went over consistent across your entire customer success org?
Ooh. It's interesting, because the fire drill approach we just talked about often happens and then great content gets lost. And so consistency is all important with customer success. And thinking about taking those meetings that work, the value measurement that actually helps succeed in a specific situation, and making that generalizable and applicable. That's really important. And in times where face-to-face meetings are hard, making it generally applicable and interesting in online meetings is triply important.
Great. And I think that's all the time we have for questions now. We'll get back to everyone that entered a question directly if we didn't get to it. Real quick before we go, we have a really exciting webinar upcoming next month, and we're really excited about this one. We're going to be joined by Rick Cantrell, who's Director of Value-Based Strategies at Fiserv. And he'll be sharing about how they mobilized a value selling initiative involving over 1,500 team members globally that saw them increase win rates by 10% and decrease sales cycles by 50 to 75% with the help of LeveragePoint. This is really a can't miss webinar, so please make sure to pre-register in the survey. You won't regret it. And that's it from us today. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us, and a special thank you for Peyton for his amazing insights. And from all of us here at LeveragePoint, have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.